get that resolved. Sorry for that.
No, that's
So anyway, I got sidetracked and working on endangered insects, and as was mentioned, my professional career was focused on rare and endangered insects. And then I'm going to speak about the natural history and some conservation efforts that related silver spots are undergoing that may be pertinent to the myrtle silver spot. And then Tanya will take over after I finish and will speak about a citizen science effort that she's spearheading to learn more about the myrtle silver spot violet food plant. Okay, so the first topic I think I need to uh, explain to everybody is if you look online, you're going to find some different names that apply to the myrtle silver spot, different scientific names. So if you go to a website, say like the Tree of Life, you'll see a hierarchy of names from kingdom all the way down to subspecies. And you should see something similar to what is on this slide here. So all insects are, of course, in the animal kingdom, and then the phylum Arthropoda or arthropods, and then the class Insecta, and the order, the butterflies are in the order Lepidoptera. And Lepidoptera literally means wings with scales on them. The scales are like shingles on a roof in their arrangement, and they give the colors like you see in the photograph there on the wings, the colors and patterns and so forth that are used to help identify all butterfly species and subspecies. Now, the myrtle silver spot in particular is a member of the family of the Nymphalidae. These are commonly referred to as the brush-footed butterflies. And until recently, all North American silver spots were in the genus Speyeria, but some recent taxonomic work has decided that Speyeria should be a subgenus of a more broadly distributed in various parts of the world genus that's named Argynnis. And common names for the butterflies are usually silver spots, but you'll also see fritillaries used in some treatments. And then um, from the generic name to the species name and even the subspecies name, many of these names for the genus Speyeria and Argynnis come from Greek mythology, especially gods and goddesses. The Argynnis, I think, is a young boy, if I'm remembering correctly, and Speyeria is a young girl. Zerene, at the moment, I forget what that one was from. But then the myrtleae name, which is the subspecies, is actually got a botanical derivation. It comes from the plant uh, that's known as the myrtle plant. It's in the genus Myrtus in the family Myrtaceae, and it's a shrub from the Mediterranean region that was sacred to Aphrodite, who's the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility. So there's still a bit of a connection to Greek mythology there, even though it's a plant-based name. Now, the butterfly was originally described in 1945 by two gentlemen, Dos Passos and Gray. And down at the bottom of the slide, you would have seen in the literature the names for the genus Speyeria, then the species zerene, and the subspecies myrtleae. Um, in 1998, a couple of other gentlemen decided that the butterflies from the Point Reyes area actually deserved to be recognized as a separate subspecies, and they gave it the name Punta Reyes, but that name has subsequently been synonymized. The full scientific name of the would be Argynnis, then the subgenus Speyeria, followed by the species name Zerene, and then Myrtleae, and then zoologists put the author names along with the year following the scientific name. Are you able to hear me better now, or am I still breaking up?
you sound great.
Oh, good. Okay. I'll
Everything's
continue.
fine.
Okay, I'll continue then.
Great.
So, as far as the conservation status of the butterfly, it was recognized in 1992 as an endangered species by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service pursuant to provisions of the Federal Endangered Species Act. There was a recovery plan that was published in 1995. Um, and then at the state level, we've had an interesting history in California. For many years, the state regulation specifically excluded insects as a type of animal that could be recognized as an endangered or threatened species. So even to this day, even though that language has been changed, the butterfly has not been recognized at the state level. It's just the federal level, but it does get treated under CEQA and other federal regulations. So it's protected, but it'd be kind of interesting and nice to have it protected at the state level as well as the federal. Um, the butterfly's habitat requirements are fairly straightforward. It lives in coastal dune grassland situations like you find at Point Reyes along the Marin coast. And as you go a little farther north of there in northern Marin County and southern Sonoma County, it occurs more frequently in coastal terrace prairie type conditions. And then in both those types of grasslands, there can be um, influx of scrub or adjacent areas of scrub, and usually where there's sparse cover and kind of a mix of the grassland or prairie habitat with the scrub, those are also areas where you can find the butterfly. So like was already mentioned, the butterfly's larval food plant plants, that's what they're drinking from the flowers, and those species are unrelated to the viola. Another important habitat requirement is that the butterflies living in these exposed coastal areas need shelter from the wind, excuse me, and the fog and so forth. The, all insects are cold-blooded and they're dependent upon ambient sunlight to be able to warm up and be active. So situations like tree windrows, pocket meadows and wooded areas, and even topography can offer them the kind of shelter that enables them to be active when the conditions right at the immediate coast are not suitable for them to be active. And then lastly, they've been found in areas from about sea level to around 1,000 feet in elevation, and also up to about 3 miles inland from the shoreline. So I mentioned about the coastal prairie and northern coastal scrub habitats, and this map is here just to kind of show you the distribution of those habitats, and you can see that they occur primarily along the coastal areas of California. Um, Speyeria zerene or Argynnis zerene actually has 3 subspecies that have been recognized under the Endangered Species Act as either or threatened subspecies. The Myrtle Silverspot in Marin County and southern Sonoma County, and up along the Mendocino coast, you get the Marin Silverspot, and then finally up in Del Norte on into Oregon is where the Oregon Silverspot. And they all live in very similar habitats to a large degree and have very similar biologies since they're all part of the same species. They all feed on Viola adunca too. Um, Historically, the butterfly was described in 1945, and they were using specimens that were actually collected in 1919. And the specimen label data said San Mateo. And some folks, I think, were kind of misled into thinking that it was somewhere around the city of San Mateo where they were collected, where it's really more likely that they were collected along the western coast of San Mateo County. Um, when I came to California, because of my interest in silver spots, I went out to all the local areas where these different species of silver spots occurred, and I spent quite a bit of time looking in coastal and more central areas of San Mateo County, and I didn't find the butterfly anywhere. And nobody, the last time it was actually seen was 1950 down in the Pescadero area. So it's believed to be extinct in San Mateo County. But other than that location, as part of the historical range, the other areas are up around in the Point Reyes area, and then Bodega Head area, and then on up to the mouth of the Russian River. And if you look at the current distribution, which is on the right-hand side of the slide here, all the red spots on here, and they're small in places, so let me use my mouse to kind of point them out. Excluding San Mateo County, the distribution is very similar to the historical range. Uh, Point Reyes, there's a known location up in the Tamales Point area, the Bodega Head area, and then up again around Jenner and the mouth of the Russian River. All right, so silver spots, most of the different species are highly variable in their phenotypic appearance. So I'm just giving you a flavor here of kind of what some of this variation is for the myrtle silver spot, which are the top two rows here. And on the left-hand side, you see the male and female, upper side on the left, underside on the right, and then some more examples to the right here in these two rows. And then I also illustrate the barren silver spot since it's the one that's closest geographically to the myrtle silver spot in the bottom two rows and they're arranged in the same way. And you can see that if you get into an area, say like around Jenner, where the two butterflies are known to somewhat coexist, it can be very difficult looking at the range of phenotypes here to always be 100% certain as to which subspecies you've got because there's overlap in their respective phenotypes. All right, so the larval food plant, again, this is an obligate relationship, is the caterpillar or larval stage of the butterfly feeds on Viola adunca. It's commonly referred to as the western dog violet or the hooked spur violet. And as you see here, the colors of the flowers vary from kind of a light blue to more violet color to even a little purplish in intensity. It's a few facts about the viola, and Tanya had found this nice artistic rendering of a viola dunca here in the lower portion of the picture uh, with a silver spot and a caterpillar on it that looks like a silver spot caterpillar. Anyway, Viola adunca is a perennial plant, so the above ground growth, though, will usually die back by wintertime. And it normally blooms in the spring, usually starting in early March. I've got a few plants in my yard that started flowering actually a couple of weeks ago. I think with this warm spell that we've just recently experienced, they've been thrown off a little bit. Um, and sometimes in some places, you'll see flowers lasting later into the summer, but most of the flowering activity is in the springtime. Um, the seeds are small and black and can live for up to 100 years. And native ants are very important for the seed dispersal of the viola plants. And in coastal areas, as well as other parts of California, many of the native ant species have been displaced by the introduced Argentine ant that occurs virtually anywhere humans live. And that may be a factor affecting the habitat and reproduction of the viola in some of the areas where the butterfly occurs. The plant is edible and it was consumed by indigenous populations, and it's known to be high in vitamins A and D. Um, it's also kind of a small plant, short in stature, usually no more than about 6 inches tall. And when the vegetation gets dense around it, because the viola needs sunlight, just like the butterfly does, um, and the caterpillars in particular, the violet may not appear at some point when the vegetation gets too dense, or it can actually grow these adventitious vine-like stems that will enable it to climb over adjacent plant material and seek sunlight. But at some point when the vegetation just gets too dense, it'll quit to produce any above ground growth But the nice thing about it is the rhizomes of the plant can remain alive in the soil for many years without having to have any above ground growth. Okay, so the map here in the center of this slide is just meant to show you kind of what's the known range of the Viola adunca within the range of the Myrtle Silverspot. And you can see that it pretty well mirrors the distribution maps that I showed you a few slides ago. Viola adunca does occur throughout California. There's a number of different subspecies, and the one that we're dealing with and that the myrtles feeds on is actually subspecies adunca. Okay, so just so everybody has the same understanding about a butterfly's life cycle, I thought this slide would serve to kind of lay that foundation. So a female butterfly, which would be here in the lower left, it looks something like a monarch, kind of an artistic rendering. Um, they lay eggs usually on the plant that the caterpillars will feed on, but not always. It depends on the species of butterfly. Um, those eggs will hatch and you get a caterpillar or larval stage, it's also referred to as. And all insects have exoskeletons. So for that caterpillar to grow, it will feed for a while and then kind of look like the Michelin tire mascot where it can't expand or grow in size anymore. So it has to shed its exterior skin in order to grow a little larger. And in the case of the silver spot, there are six sheddings of the skin, or six larval instars, they're called. Now, when it reaches maturity as a caterpillar, then it looks for a place to pupate or make a chrysalis. And you can see an example of that down here in the lower right. And within a couple weeks' time, usually then the adult myrtle silverspot will emerge. And the complete process, all these changes in life forms, it's referred to as metamorphosis. Now, the adult season is typically from about mid-June to mid-September, but there can be quite a bit of variation in the starting and ending times, as well as the duration of the flight season from year to year at one particular site, and even within the same year between different sites. And regardless, there's only one generation of the butterfly per year, so we refer to this as a univoltine butterfly, meaning that there's just the one generation. Now, there are several different behaviors that adults will exhibit, and they forage, they do basking to warm up and stay warm. Um, and even though this is a slide on the left here of a mating pair, or in copulo, as we'll call them, um, it also illustrates kind of the two different types of basking behavior. One is where the adult will put the wings open like an airplane, and the doors are oriented towards the sun. And then the behavior is that the wings are folded over the body, and like you see on the left-hand side there, and they will tilt the wings and orient the underside of the wings towards the sun. And both types of basking behavior can be used by the same individual. They just, usually do one or the other, but it's not a hard and fast rule. Um, Now, when it comes to time for trying to find a mate, the males exhibit a behavior that's called patrolling, which is a kind of a directed flight where they're on a search mission looking for a receptive female in order to have a partner for mating purposes. And they fly along the grass tops, and if you watch them, they'll dip down and investigate open areas in the grassland areas, or even in the scrub. And the females tend to stay down closer to the ground, especially if they've just newly emerged. And the males are looking for, um, butterflies, females that are often just emerged and sometimes even have yet to emerge, and they'll come and gather around a chrysalis out in the field. Um, the wing scales, I mentioned how these are like arranged like shingles on a roof. There are two types of scales. The first type is what gives the butterfly its color, like the areas between these black veins, as they're called. The veins are like struts that kind of add support and also assist in the circulation of the butterfly's hemolymph. Um, but these scales in between that give it the pattern and colors, um, they look like the scales over here in the upper right, the darker scales. And if you get a close up here, and the one on the left here, 3,500 times magnification using a scanning electron microscope, you can see that they have kind of a lattice type structure. And part of the color pattern that you see is actually reflected light based on the lattice structure, and part of it is generated by pigment as well. Um, Now, along the veins of the adult butterfly, there's a second type of scale, and you can see that over here on the 120 magnification image again. And these are, you see the kind of little frilly ones that are in the light colored area here on a diagonal. When you blow those up higher magnification, you can see they look like the fringes of those scales, which are called androconia. They kind of terminate and have these fringes of flexible Q-tip looking structures. And those release pheromones during courtship. And when a courtship occurs, the male and the female will very frantically kind of fly erratically up, down, and around, and touch each other's wings frequently and so forth. And part of that process is to distribute the pheromone that's being released, and it acts as an aphrodisiac. And so it puts the two butterflies into the mood, so to speak, for mating purposes. Now, females will only mate once typically, but male. Now, after mating, the main purpose of a female is to lay eggs and, to give rise to the next generation of butterflies. And I couldn't find a similar diagram for a silver spot. So this is a swallowtail butterfly that I'm using as a substitute to illustrate a couple things. Um, the forelegs, and in particular the terminal ends of the forelegs, known as the tarsus, are used for tasting purposes. But they also have, if you look in the green background here, blow up of a leg, they also have spines on them. And the female butterfly will initially look for violets using, I think, visual cues. But in order to make a final determination, she often will walk up to a plant or land on it, and with her forelegs rapidly tap the epidermis of the viola plant or whatever plant she's landed on, and those little spines will puncture the epidermis. And if it's a viola, it releases the secondary chemical compound that confirms the identity to the butterfly that that is indeed Viola odonca, and the food plant that she's looking for to lay eggs on. And this is referred to as drumming behavior because it's like a very rapid drum roll that a drummer would do, and it only occurs very briefly. And they don't do this to every single violet that they approach, but they will usually do it once and then lay multiple eggs in an area, one egg at a time. And they don't always lay them directly on the violet plants, but often nearby and on other plants and accumulated debris and so forth. And if you look down in the lower portion of this slide, if I can get my mouse there, you can get a close up here of what some of the uh, small spines look like that they use for puncturing the epidermis. And then they also have sensory organs here that detect the chemical that the viola releases. Okay, so like I mentioned, the female will lay the eggs usually singly, and at first they're kind of a cream color, then they turn yellow, and then eventually they turn this kind of mottled brown. And there's no particular pattern. Different eggs will be mottled in different places. But the thing that I find very interesting and have looked at in the scanning electron microscope is kind of the external structure of the egg. So this 125 times photo is of the micropyle area and top of the egg, which is only about a millimeter in size, but this is focused on the top area. And when it gets magnified even larger, 500 times over on the right here, you can kind of see the arrangement or pattern of these cells in the center here. And that's the area referred to as the micropyle. And this pattern is different among different silver spot species. So it can actually be used as a diagnostic character for the eggs if you find eggs out in the field. All right, so within about 2 weeks' time after an egg has been laid, the caterpillar emerges from the eggshell, and it is there at a time of year in the summer, usually, or on into the fall, depending upon when the egg gets laid, when the viola is really not edible. So the caterpillar will eat the eggshell, and then it will find a place to spin a physiological resting stage called as diapause. And diapause is, for an invertebrate is similar to hibernation for a mammal. And the caterpillar remains in diapause for the remainder of the summer, all of the fall, and then for the early winter months. And depending upon when it started, this may be a period of about 6 to 8 months in duration. And during that time, they are basically helpless. They are defenseless. They don't move and so forth because it's arrested uh, development time and respiration and so forth. And so they have very high mortality rates at this stage in the life cycle. Now, if they do survive to the late winter or early spring, the larva then breaks diapause and it has to then search for new viola plants in which to feed. And normally they start feeding on the flowers because that's the first part of the plant to emerge above ground. And then they will transfer to the leaves once the leaves are up and above ground and open up. And you can see examples here of the 6 larval instars that are involved in getting to maturity. They start out at about 1.5 millimeters in length, and they grow to a final length of about 38 millimeters, which is about 1.5 inches long. And this period of time that's required to get through these 6 instars in nature can actually be a few months in time. And feeding is intermittent. They feed at night, and then they crawl off the viola plants during the daytime and will usually hide in nearby vegetation or thatch or um, whatever they can find under a rock, that kind of thing. And they also feed intermittently because, again, they're cold-blooded. And a lot of days the temperatures aren't warm enough for them to be active. So they like to have areas where sunlight comes down to ground level and they can just stay motionless there and bask in order to warm up and, you know, do the search for a violet plant that they're looking for to hopefully have their next meal on. And studies that have been done with the Oregon silverspot butterfly, which is a close relative again of the Myrtle silverspot, indicate that a caterpillar typically needs about 12 different viola plants to complete its development. So you can imagine if plants are widely spaced and not close together, you know, it takes more energy and more time for the caterpillar to find its next meal. And so it also can lead to starvation and, you know, higher mortality in situations like that than if you have denser patches of plants that are in closer proximity to one another. Okay, so when the caterpillar is mature, it then looks for a place to pupate or make its chrysalis. And there's a really nice time lapse video at these YouTube websites that the Oregon Zoo put together on the change in from the last instar caterpillar to the pupal stage. These are just some selected stills that were pulled from those videos. And after about 2 weeks, the adult butterfly is ready to emerge. And over here on the far right, you'll see an image of a chrysalis that you can actually see all the body parts of the adult that's getting ready to emerge. There's the abdomen here. Whoops, sorry, go back. The wings here, the head, the thorax. There's even, I think, hints of the antennae here, or whatever. That might just be the leading edge of the wing. But anyway, um, once you see a chrysalis like that, you know that the emergence of the adult is, pending very shortly. Okay, so um, one of the main activities of adults is that they need to forage or get nectar from flowers. So we call that, nectaring. And this is a nice photo from Jeff Smick, who's going to say a few words later in the presentation. But I want to call your attention to the proboscis of the butterfly, which I've got my mouse on here. It comes out from the base of the head, kind of like the chin area, and the proboscis is flexible, and it basically functions like a soda straw for the butterfly. And they drink various plants. Now, if you haven't ever looked closely at a butterfly's proboscis, I thought you might like to see these images. Again, they're scanning electron micrographs. But the top one is how the butterfly, when it's not feeding, uh, it coils up the proboscis here in a series of concentric circles here, and then it just is at the base of the head or the chin area. And if you take a cross section and look at it, you see it's like a bundle of tubes or hoses, and the tubes that are in the middle portion of the proboscis are what the nectar goes up, and then these other external ones are airways that are used with the pressure that's needed to kind of suck up the nectar and so forth. Now, the butterfly will feed on various plants, and usually a sweet needs a variety of different species upon which it can get nectar at different times in the flight season. And at every location, you'll find that they have favored nectar plants. Some commonly used ones are the seaside daisy, that's over here on the left, the yellow sand verbena, and then gum plants or grandelia. And as well as these plants, at uh, Point Reyes, it was found a study that Don Adams did, and Jeff Smick may have helped her with it. I don't recall specifically right at the moment, but anyway, it was found that the Monardella, curly leaf Monardella, was the favored plant, and it was used about twice as frequently as any other nectar plants. And I mentioned this one in particular because it's also a CNPS recognized rare plant. Now, other plants that they will often visit are non-native flowers, and things like Cirsium vulgare, the bull thistle, as well as a few other thistles are commonly visited. If there's a wet area in an area of myrtle silverspot habitat, you might find pennyroyal, which is another mint. Mentha is the genus, and they like that. And one that they especially like as you get farther north in their geographic range is the tansy ragwort. And all three of these plants that I just mentioned, the non-natives, uh, cattle operators try to control and even eradicate if they can. And the tansy ragwort in particular even has had a biological control program in place since the 1950s, where a European moth and a leaf beetle were introduced to help control it. And I can recall when I first started going out to sites in Marin and Sonoma County back in the 1970s, I used to see a lot more of the tansy ragwort in places than I do today, for example. So it's had, a dampening effect on the tansy ragwort. But the problem is that silver spots as a genus often will go to non-native plants for nectar. And we don't know exactly why that's the case, but there's some very limited evidence to suggest that some of these plants actually offer a higher concentration of nectar, or the nectar is easier to access. And there's a very strong correlation with the number of eggs laid by a female with the type of nectar that it gets and the amount of nectar that it gets. So there may be something to that. So I mention these things because it kind of poses a bit of a paradox from a conservation point of view, in that, naturally you want to try to eliminate, or at least control non-native plants that don't belong in these habitats, and yet on the other hand, they may also offer some benefit to the butterfly as a nutrition source in the adult stage. So besides that, there's some various threats to the myrtle silverspot, and loss and degradation of their habitats, of course, is one of the leading causes. And throughout the coastal areas, especially north of Point Reyes, where you get into the coastal terrace prairie habitat more so than the dunes, cattle grazing is very prevalent. And cattle grazing can actually be beneficial on the one hand, but obviously if it's an area gets overgrazed, that's not good. But the timing and intensity of the grazing, as well as flexibility of the ranchers to be able to move cattle for various reasons related to the butterfly's life cycle and timing of events and so forth, can actually work out reasonably well. I've worked with some ranchers and we've worked out some plans that seem to help with other silver spot species. Um, Exotic vegetation, like I've mentioned, especially can be a problem. Things like the non-native perennial grasses, ice plant in the dunes, and so forth, and then just other non-natives elsewhere in the grasslands. And also, there's a issue with natural succession happening, especially as woody plants move into the grassland. They can shade out or just displace the violets and even the nectar plants to some degree. So that's a concern. And part of that's got to do with fire suppression. Um, and our Native American populations used to burn many of these grasslands with some frequency, but these days that kind of thing doesn't happen routinely anymore. Um, and then lack of natural disturbances, that's just part of the natural ecology of the grasslands, has led to accumulated thatch, and those are factors that can choke out the violets and the nectar plants as well. And the early stages of the butterfly need sunlight near ground level, but so does the violet. So lack of sunlight near ground level due to the shading or dense overgrowth of vegetation is detrimental. And then I'm sure this would be obvious, as insecticides and herbicides, have both direct and indirect effects. In fact, more and more information is accumulating, for example, like with the monarch butterfly, that even just herbicide use in areas is accumulating in subsequent generations of the milkweed, and then the caterpillars of the butterfly feeding on the milkweed, imbibe those chemicals and are being affected adversely. And so it may be a factor that's contributing to a large degree for the butterfly's decline. And then lastly, all the remaining populations of the Myrtle silverspot are rather small in population size. And so as a result of that, there's a definite concern about over collecting and so forth. Most uh, butterfly collectors don't collect long series of specimens. They like to get a couple specimens, and if a population is healthy, you can usually do that without causing any real harm to the butterfly population. But when the numbers are small, and in some cases, I mean, populations, when they've been monitored, there've only been a few dozen butterflies seen in any particular year, it does heighten your concerns about over collecting and the impacts that it could have on these populations that remain. All right, so the Oregon silver spot, which is illustrated here, has had ongoing conservation efforts for actually since the 1990s. And the Oregon Zoo has kind of been spearheading many of those efforts outside of habitat acquisition and working out management plans and that kind of thing on the ground. But they've had captive breeding efforts and they've propagated the viola in large quantities and under greenhouse conditions and so forth. And then they'll get adult females and get them to lay eggs and rear the immature stages. And so on the right-hand side here, you see pupae that are ready to be released out in the field. And actually, several different life stages of the butterfly have been released, including the pupae, the adults that have been reared, the larvae, like you see illustrated in these first two images. And then also there's been propagation and active seeding of the viola itself. And some of the management activities that have been done have been mowing, and that's also been applied to the Marin Silverspot butterfly, like at Salt Point. Um, and then vegetation thinning. And so, like you can see in the slide over here on the right, where this violet's got good sunlight hitting it, and it's not overgrown by anything. So folks have gone out and actually removed and thinned the vegetation around the viola plants. And as the caterpillars, when they crawl off the plant, they often look for a new plant after they've finished feeding on one, and they will kind of have to wander around and through all this dense vegetation, if that's the structure of the vegetation, to find their next viola plant to make a meal of. And then lastly, like I mentioned, there have been grazing management plans that have been developed and seem to have promise for habitat management and benefiting the butterfly, but also satisfying the needs of the rancher as well. Um, so monitoring of the butterfly has proven to be a little bit challenging at times. One of the reasons in the case of the larvae is that the early instars are very small, especially since they're usually nocturnal in their activity and may not actually be on the food plant during the daytime. In fact, when I've done surveys, I usually go out and do nighttime surveys and may even lay out cover boards in areas where I see feeding damage and caterpillars that I find still on the food plants during the daytime. When I've collected a sample of them and brought them back to rear them, they usually ended up being parasitized. Adults, again, like I mentioned before, the numbers are often very low at the remaining populations, and silver spot numbers, regardless of whichever species you're talking about, are known to fluctuate dramatically from year to year based on seasonal and uh, daily weather conditions and so forth. So things like the temperature and fog and wind can affect the butterfly's activity and their detectability on any given day during the flight season, but also the seasonal conditions may cause higher mortality and just, cause a population to decline one year and then another year the conditions are more favorable and they will rebound very quickly and be more abundant. Adults also, when you're out trying to census them or count them, are most apparent when they're flying or foraging on flowers. Even though they're got these bright orange colors and the silver spots and so forth, they're often very well camouflaged and blend in with the vegetation, especially as the season progresses and more of the vegetation gets a little more browned. Um, and then the flight season is long, but the duration and timing varies annually, which can throw off any kind of comparisons from year to year because you're not always necessarily sampling at the exact same times to make a direct comparison. And then lastly, if you may be out in the coastal area, coastal meadow area, grassland area looking for adults and the weather conditions aren't the greatest, the butterflies have likely moved somewhat inland seeking shelter and just aren't there to be uh, observed. So all these factors can kind of complicate getting accurate census estimates of the butterfly life stages. So because of this, Sonoma County State Parks and stewards of the Sonoma coast actually have developed a program for monitoring the viola, and they use the CalFlora mobile app and map the locations and abundance of the viola in the coastal prairies of the state parks there in Sonoma County. And uh, I wanted to mention an effort that I did several years ago with the Marin Silverspot, that it was the development of what's referred to as a species distribution model. And in doing so, what you're trying to do is identify what are the habitat requirements, and that they can then be used to predict what's the distribution of the Marin Silverspot, in this case, throughout its geographic range. And what I'll have here is a slide that kind of gives the basic concepts of the model itself. And in this case, we're looking for a flower, which is indicated by the little yellow-orange with the red center um, graphic here. And it occurs in forest habitats within a wider geographic area. Some areas are occupied, they have the black background, and others are not occupied by this flower. And at every one of the known locations, what you do is there's certain features of that habitat that you think may be important uh, towards explaining, well, why does the flower grow where you find it? And in this simple example, factors such as temperature, forest cover, and precipitation are things that were measured. And then you take that data set and you submit it and use some software for species distribution modeling. And there's several different programs available out there. Maxent is a popular one, GARP is another one, and there's still others. And the output that you get are shown then over here on the right. First of all, you see which of the factors are the best predictors of where you might find the flower out in the field. And then also you can take all the information with the uh, different factors and kind of determine what's the actual niche of that flower within that forest habitat, based on, which of these factors, which of these habitat factors best predict where you would find it. And then lastly, you get a map as output that gives you an idea of where you should look within your area of study. And these darker yellow and orange areas are what are referred to as target areas that the species distribution model, using the data you collected, predicts you're most likely to find that flower in this case. And if you were to do field surveys or validation surveys, they're frequently referred to as. So what happened was, back about 25 years ago, um, I was out working with another entomologist. And at that point in time, even though the Marin Silverspot had been recognized as a endangered species, it had not been seen for many years and was actually feared that it might be extinct. Well, we were doing some field work for another butterfly in the Point Arena area, and we happened to discover, or possibly rediscover, a location that still supported the silver spot butterfly. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was pretty interested in that finding, and they wanted to know, well, where else could we expect to maybe find the Marin Silverspot based on what we learned about the habitat at this site. So the problem that I had is, normally for a species distribution model, you want to have a lot of data about the occurrences of the species that you're studying. And most of the records that I had, well, all the records I had were older, and the location information was not very specific. So while I knew that there were specimens collected in different points along the Sonoma and Mendocino coast in the past, I couldn't always pinpoint where the exact location was. So I decided, okay, I was able to get a number of records for Viola adunca that were more specific. And John Little, who wrote the Jepson treatment for Viola, was kind enough to share his records with me and so forth. So I had a pretty good suite of records of to where the viola occurred. And just to even be more precise, I decided, okay, I'm going to make a trip and go relocate these plants in these areas as best I can and then GPS their location so I would have as exact location information as possible. And then while I was there, also identified certain features of the habitat where the viola were found, and those are features such as the soil type, the vegetation type, the slope, aspect, elevation, the presence or absence of known nectar plants, and the type of shelter, if any, that was present. Um, now, I used the viola as a surrogate since I didn't have enough records of the barrens, but all these variables that I looked at were categorical type variables, and the standard kind of species distribution modeling software that you use relies largely on quantitative type variables. So I couldn't use any of those programs to do my analysis to see, well, which of those habitat variables were the best predictors of where I might find the viola and hopefully the silver spot. So I use logistic regression as an alternative since it's designed to work with categorical variables. And in doing the analysis, I found that soil and vegetation types were the best predictors uh, for telling me where the viola adunca might occur in different soil types, along with a couple of them had more than one slope category. So 15 soil types altogether, but two in particular um, ended up being the best predictors. And so when I transferred the information to GIS and I plotted the results on the aerial photos of the coast for that my study area, um, the green lines on here show the intervals like you saw on the overview map back here. And I'm only showing you a few of them because I didn't want to bore you with too many slides here. But then the red outlines are the preferred soils for the viola. And if you look at the colored round dots, you'll see yellow dots on here, which were historical records for the viola, and that I observed while I was out in the field and checking these polygons for the presence or absence of the viola. And then I decided, well, I needed to follow up and, ultimately go look for the butterfly. So during the flight season, I made several visits to these locations, and the green stars that you see on here are places where I found the Marin and Silverspot. So it does turn out to still exist, much like the Myrtle Silverspot, small populations, but in a few different places along the northern Sonoma and Mendocino coast. And I mentioned this technique because it's really nice to help you since you when you try to go out and map viola. I mean, you can always go to a particular place and hope that you're going to find it, but this is a technique that'll allow you to kind of find where you're most likely to find the violet and hopefully the butterfly if you're able to follow up and look for it as well. And so it kind of maximizes your survey time to give you the most bang for the buck, so to speak. And I think at this point, I've uh, said what I had to say. I'm going to turn things over to Tanya and let her um, continue with the presentation here.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jake. That was so comprehensive and exciting. It's such a neat story about the Myrtle Silverspot. And I wanted to expand a little bit specifically on Marin County. You know, Dick talked a lot about a few things, but to back up a little bit, I did a little research on the Violaceae family, and I found that there's 762 secondary metabolites alone in that family. So when we talk about that chemical release that the butterfly is initiating with the foreleg, it makes you wonder which one it is, but there hasn't been any research that I could find that demonstrated what the chemical is. So to talk a little bit more about viola in Marin, this is a map of the iNaturalist occurrences that we could pull from a recent observations. And you can see in the red dots, there's some numbers affiliated with it. There's so many occurrences in that vicinity, we had to just consolidate the number. So there's a lot more there. And then also you can see that the habitat where it's foraging as an adult butterfly is a high concentration also along the dunes there. So surprisingly, there's not as much inland, even though the viola does extend pretty far inland. Okay, next slide. So to build off of what Dick had discovered with his species distribution model, we took a look at the soils in the West Marin area. And as you can see, there's a lot of different types between loam, sandy loam, and each of these have a category of their own. But if we dive a little bit deeper and we look a little bit more closely where there's a high concentration of a lot of the silver spots, next slide, you can start to pull out some patterns. And so even though that these are locations of where the adult butterflies are by the red dots, they must have habitat nearby that they're using as their host plant in the overwintering. And so it leads us to wonder if these grasslands, which is primarily the habitat here, um, has a higher density of viola within these Tamales fine sandy loam and the Tamales sobe complex. And this is going to be an area of focus for our efforts to do some mapping of viola. So let's see here. And this is sort of a call out to the public, because I imagine there's going to be some interest in wanting to help better understand this distribution. It's going to help us with a large data set later on. If people want to help participate, you can go ahead and skip to the next slide. And we're creating a volunteer effort. If anybody wants to come out and join, we're going to do some mapping this March, April, and May. This, I'm going to drop it in the chat. And fortunately, we have the Point Reyes National Seashore Association that's is supporting this effort. Cristobal, who's on this call, is coming in from Prinza. He's currently the restoration volunteer coordinator. And we're going to hope to get a good effort to help map this population while it's flowering. And so as Dick mentioned, that the butterfly is an adult phase from June to August. The flowering for the viola extends into the summer, but it begins as early as March 1st. Possibly sooner, it sounds like, or a little bit earlier. So if you are interested, we'd love to have you come out. The importance is that this grassland may be going through some changes. If we go back to the previous slide, you can see that's exactly where a lot of the ranching leases are. And so the conditions are going to change with removal of the disturbance regime of the cattle. And that's unknown what that's going to look like going forward. So it's really important timing in a lot of regards for us to be able to capture this pre and post. Additionally, there's been some effort going on to document the adult butterfly populations a little bit further north up in Abbott's Lagoon. And my understanding that there's a restoration project proposal that's underway that, as many of you know, a lot of restoration has happened at Abbott's. And so this effort would further enhance habitat for the adult butterflies. And with that, I'm going to have you advance to the next slide. And I want to hand it over to Jeff. We have a guest here that we're really fortunate to have, who is he started many years ago working on the Myrtle Silverspot butterfly out in Point Reyes. And some of the photos that we've put up in this slideshow presentation came from him. And if he's able to jump on, you're welcome to unmute, Jeff.
Yes, I did
There you
unmute. I'm not
are.
able to share my video. It's disabled, but that's fine. Thanks. That's a wonderful presentation, Dick. It's been a long time, but it was you and I've worked together many times over the years, and Tanya, great seeing you as well. Thanks for the invite. So yeah, we're going to be working with Point Reyes in the next year or so to do some monitoring of the adult butterfly at Abbott's Lagoon. The Point Reyes seashore staff have undertaken in a big dune restoration effort up there. There's a lot of the European beach grass that is invaded and taken over what would have historically been great habitat for the butterfly, nectarine species in particular. And they've removed all of that. Native plants are starting to come back in. And I was talking to Lorraine Parsons at a conference a few years ago, and she was presenting on the habitat restoration. I asked her what's going on with the butterflies out there, and she's like, nobody's asked. I was like, let's get some grant money and figure it out. And so she and Dave Press from the National Park Service have submitted a grant request, and they've made it through the first round, and we're working on putting together some documents for the next round now. And there's a few of us involved. Ryan Hill from University of the Pacific is also involved in that, and he is on the line as well. And Ray Scampavia from the company that I work with, WRA, headquartered in San Rafael, will also be assisting. And so we're really excited to do that. And then I just wanted to share a couple of comments. So I studied Myrtle Silverspot back in like 2001, 2, 3, when I was a seasonal at Point Reyes. Wonderful kind of first job coming out of graduate school. So really happy to be doing that out there. But I wanted to touch on something that Dick said. He was commenting on the habitat that the adults are commonly seen in. And he talked about the dune habitat and the coastal prairie and then also coastal scrub. When I started out at Point Reyes looking for the butterfly, it was really poorly known to the staff out there about its distribution. And we were really focused in the dune habitats and in the coastal prairie right behind the dune, thinking that was the main place where they occurred. And while that's definitely where we see them frequently, because I was an employee with the Park Service, and Dick mentioned how hard it is to survey for these, especially out there. You guys know West Marin. It can be you're heading out there and it's sunny, and you pop over the hill, and all of a sudden you're in thick fog, and that's really not great habitat for butterflies. But as an employee for the Park Service, we could just drop everything and go look for adult butterflies when the weather was right. And so that's what we did. And so we really went all around the park and even some neighboring areas outside of the park on the mainland and discovered quite a few new, quote unquote, populations that were previously unknown. And some of those were shown on the iNaturalist slide, but a lot of them are in this kind of scrub prairie mix. And we would find a different Monardella villosa, which is perennial. The undulata that grows in the dunes is annual. It would commonly be found growing up through the coyote brush, and a great nectar source for the butterfly in those areas. And then another interesting thing we found out was the main nectar plants out in the dunes. A lot of those are annuals, and they start to senesce before the flight season is over. So some of the primary nectar plants that the butterflies use are no longer available. We found them starting to use plants we have never seen them use before, and one of the in the outside of the dunes, and one of the main ones was solidago or goldenrod. And it's not super common, but they occur if you're familiar with this plant, which many of you are because it's a CNPS talk. Um, they grow in pretty large patches. And so, and they don't bloom until late July or August. And this butterfly, while it doesn't start flying until mid-June, we would see it blooming, see that flying well into, mid to late August. And there was a big shift in the nectar sources they used over that time frame. So it was a very interesting temporal shift. And we would see them start to favor the goldenrod later in the season, which is probably closer to some of their nectar, some of the host plants, the viola, since it's more inland. So just a few interesting tidbits. I also wanted to quickly mention that Caroline Provost from State Parks is here. She has been working with some of those volunteers that were mentioned, and is also doing adult butterfly surveys in the summer. And I had the pleasure of joining her for a day last summer, looking for the butterfly in some new areas to me. And that was pretty exciting. Saw quite a few last summer. So they're out there. You just got to go at the right time and the right place to find them.
Right.
Thanks, Tanya.
Yeah. Thank you. That was wonderful insight on its distribution. I'm so happy to hear that there's work going on. When we started this project, we were asking the same question: what's going on with the Myrtle Silverspot? We really don't know. And I hit a lot of dead ends just trying to reach out to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and getting an update since 2021, there had been a published report. So it was nice that as we were putting this presentation together to discover that there's a lot more going on and in the works. So we're so grateful. And, you know, again, I want to just throw it out there that if people do want to get involved and are interested, I think the best way is to start with coming out and mapping the viola with us. We're going to have, you know, there's opportunities later on possibly to see the adult butterfly. There's a California naturalist training that's going on right now that we hope, and maybe in April there might be an opportunity for at least getting out to the dunes, but it won't be really in time. Might be a little premature for when the adult emerges. So there'll be more on that if you decide to sign up with this link here. We'll try to keep everybody abreast of what's happening with that. So I'm sending a link again. Okay, well, I wanted to hand it back over to Kristen. It's been we're getting down to just the last little bits. If anybody had some questions, this might be a good opportunity for that, or I'll let Kristen decide. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you all very much for participating. And I think we have, trying to see the chat here. Show chat. Maybe, Dick, you might want to take your screen share down. And I'm not sure why I'm not seeing. Here we go. Okay, so let me scroll down. There was somebody who was having trouble seeing the slides. And oops, lost it again. Rob Katz asks if the Woodward lightning fire happened within the habitat of the butterfly. Does anyone have
yes. Yeah, it
Oh
certainly
yeah, Tanya,
did.
you answered that.
Yeah, so we just good timing because we just did a Woodward fire hike with Point Reyes National Seashore Association just last weekend, I believe it was. Was it 2 weekends ago? And so yes, the viola does extend out in that footprint, particularly in along the coastal trail, past Coast Camp in that vicinity. But if I look at the records of the recently naturalist occurrences that we know of, the Myrtle Silverspot hasn't been detected, but that doesn't mean it's not there. So go ahead and head out there and take a look around. Like that coastal terracing area would be appropriate for that because the coyote bush has been knocked back, so that we're getting a lot more of the coastal prairie species returning. But yes, certainly an option.
So. Ian Magnus asks, which are the soil types on which silverspot is found? But I think you covered that later in the.
Yeah, if we brought the slide back up, it was the Tamales fine sandy loam and the Tamales sobeg complex. I would have to bring the slides back up to show you.
That's
Yeah.
okay. So the talk has been recorded and will be up on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. People want to.
Now, we didn't run a habitat suitability analysis with that. It's just taking what occurred with a higher density of the iNaturalist occurrences that we had documented and overlaid it with the soils. So that just seemed to come out as a large number of them affiliated with that area. So we're going to explore that further once we get out there monitoring.
Craig Dreeman asks, how much is the annual budget for the last few years to try to save this butterfly in terms of weed management, growing plants, mowing, etc., and who is paying for it?
Yeah,
I don't. Oh, go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, Dick, you might know too.
Well, I know I don't know any exact numbers. I mean, I know Fish and Wildlife has been contributing. The Oregon Zoo has donated time and as well, and I think they have gotten funds from other sources, but I don't know any of the details, I'm afraid. And that's for the Oregon Silverspot part. I don't know what the budget might be, say, like at Point Reyes and so forth. And the Marin Silverspot, I mean, I know the state parks has been doing some work, but again, I'm not privy to the dollar amounts.
And he also asks, are you concerned that the removal of the grazing could wipe out the violas by weeds overtaking?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one of the issues. These areas have been grazed in many cases for a couple hundred years now, and so the removal of grazing can be detrimental, just like overgrazing can be. So that's where working out some grazing management plans and trying to uh, work out the timing and the intensity of the grazing, and then, like I mentioned, ranchers that are willing to be flexible and maybe move cattle off during brief periods during kind of critical life cycle points for the viola and the butterfly, have been put in place elsewhere and seem to be beneficial so that the two can kind of coexist. I mean, it's not perfect and it's not totally mastered yet, but I mean, at least it shows promise.
And Nicholas Bertulus asks, are there any obligate soil mycorrhizae or microbiome conditions for the Viola adunca?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't have an answer for you. I wouldn't be surprised that there could be, but yeah, I don't know specifically. It does grow in a variety of different soil types, like the soil
Oops, we just lost you there.
Marin's silver spot occurs, and likewise where the Oregon silver spot occur, but the microrhizomes and other kind of soil microbes and so forth are probably important, but I don't know if they've been studied yet and determined.
Eva Buxton wonders what features separate the subfamily Heliconiae from the family Nymphalidae.
Well, they at different times they've actually kind of been put in the same family, but there are some morphological features as well as biological features that have been used to separate them. And then as more and more genetic work gets done, they end up getting separated based on those features as well. And I'm not a geneticist. I mean, I have a little familiarity, but I'm not as well versed in that area. But there are other people who could speak better to that aspect.
And Carolyn Longstreth comments that during a butterfly count on July 4th, a few years ago, they found quite a few myrtle silverspots nectaring on bull thistle in the Bull Point pastures.
Yeah, and that's not unusual. When the weather conditions are right and you're there at a good time in the flight season, and I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but like males tend to be most abundant early in the flight season, and July 4th would normally be kind of relatively early in the flight season. Females would be starting to emerge and become more and more abundant, but oftentimes the males come out in good numbers in the early part of the flight season to be available for when the females emerge and make sure that there are plenty of males around so that the males can um, find a mate and then go about doing the egg laying, which is an important aspect of their duties.
And Jeffrey Perrone asks, how and why are the native ants involved in distributing the seeds of the violet?
Well, again, it's something that I know all the details about, but my understanding is that they actually disperse the seeds, and I think they may even put them to some degree in their nests and so forth. And so I think it helps with getting plants established at areas where they're not currently growing in the grassland scheme of things and so forth. But beyond that, I can't really give you any more specifics.
And Angela Windy asks, says the photos of silver spots that were shared looked an awful lot like fritillaries. What's the situation there?
Well, they're one and the same. Fritillaries and silver spots are common names that apply to butterflies in the genus Speyeria. There's also another genus called Moloria, and in Europe it's Brenthus, and so forth. So it's a group of butterflies that have multiple common names in addition to the scientific names.
And Angela's second question was answered in the program. I'll go on to Carolyn Provost, who asks, what soil types did you look for in Sonoma County?
Well, when I was looking for the Marin silver spot, there were 11 different types of soils that were identified as supporting viola plants based on the records of occurrences that I had. And then as I think I mentioned, there were a couple of different slope categories for a couple of those different soil types. So it ended up being 15 total uh, types that were used in the analysis. But two soil types, one was the Ronerville loam, and the other was the Dystropeps, if I'm pronouncing it right. They had those two soil types had the vast majority of viola occurrences that either were historical or occurrences that I identified during my field surveys, and uh, they were, like I say, had the vast majority of occurrences compared to the other uh, 13 soil types.
And Angela, again, do the caterpillars need other types of plants near the violets? You mentioned that they leave the violet plants during the day. What type of plants do they spend the day on?
I don't know if there's anything in particular that they look for. It's just more a hiding place. So it may be even if there's some thatch or just some other plants that they can hide under and so forth. That's what they're basically doing. And then spend some time basking as a behavior to warm up, and they're going to be down at or close to ground level. So that's why it's important to not have the overgrowing vegetation that would block the sunlight or shade them and so forth. And then they'll wander and, search for a viola plant that they're going to make their next meal of.
And Craig asks, would the recovery of this butterfly be measured by number of violets or numbers of butterflies or both?
Well, good question. I mean, a lot of recovery efforts and success criteria do get based kind of on the numbers of the endangered species, but with insects and especially silver spots, which fluctuate so dramatically from one year to the next. I mean, it's not unusual in a lot of univoltine butterflies to have at least an order of magnitude difference and from one year to the next when there's kind of years of extremely different weather conditions that occur. And that's just normal. So, I think in the case of the silver spots, doing as much of the habitat work as you can to rehabilitate areas and improve the conditions to benefit the butterflies, the butterflies are likely to follow suit and, do better and, not require as much uh, reliance on numbers as just recognizing that they're going to fluctuate. But if you can, increase the carrying capacity, so to speak, of the habitat areas that remain, then that's what would be beneficial to the butterflies.
Okay. I think we've come to the end of the chat. And thank you very much for all the, have I lost everyone here? No, I'm here. Thank you all for speaking, Dick and Tanya and Jeff. And hopefully we'll get participation from our listeners, our chapter members, and others with your monitoring program. And Tanya is going to be leading a series of identification workshops at Dominican University starting tomorrow evening at 6:30, and details are in our newsletter. And we're still working on a program for March, and that will come up in our e-newsletter. So looking forward to seeing you all next month, and thank you all for participating. Good night,
Good night.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.